Is there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the TEFLology podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters. Today we bring you another interview episode. Today's interviewee is Batia Laufer. Dr. Laufer works in Israel at the University of Haifa in the Faculty of Humanities. Her main contribution to the field of applied linguistics is in the area of vocabulary acquisition, an area of which she has conducted extensive empirical research. She has also worked within other disciplines, including corpus analysis and lexicography. Batia has published numerous articles in journals with topics ranging from lexical threshold, form-focused instruction, to the effects of different task type. I sat down with Dr. Laufer back in November after a talk she gave at Temple University, Japan, titled Selection, Acquisition and Testing of L2 Vocabulary, the Old and the New. I asked her a number of questions related to her talk and about the wider field of vocabulary acquisition studies. So, we hope you enjoyed today's interview. Okay, so thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed today.
It's a pleasure.
When I met you briefly during your break at your weekend session, you mentioned that you had some struggles finding a job as an English teacher in the past.
Oh yes, that's the funny thing. I finished my BA in the English department. I got my teacher's certificate of English. I was very qualified, had very good grades, and then I was walking from school to school in my city, and nobody would give me a job. And the answer was, well, you are not a native speaker of English, and you're not inexperienced, so how can we give you a job? And at that time, there were many immigrants from English-speaking countries, and even if they were not qualified to teach, they were preferred to non-native speakers. So I didn't get a job. I needed money. I took a job as a secretary in the university, and luckily enough, there was a class of dropouts there in the pre-academic unit, students who couldn't study with anybody because they were complete beginners in English, and they were also immigrants, so they didn't even know Hebrew, and nobody could communicate with them. And the head of the unit, who knew me as a student, said to me, you know, maybe since you know all these languages of these people, maybe you could teach them. Nobody else can. And if you can, that will mean you're a good teacher. And I got the class and I taught them. And from that moment, I was getting more and more EFL classes in the university, so I dropped my job as a secretary and I became an EFL teacher.
Right.
And I did it for about 10 or 12 years before I embarked on my PhD. And after the PhD, I switched to applied linguistics and research. But actually, that's how I got into the university, by not getting a job as a high school teacher.
Right, I see.
Because I was not a native speaker.
Yeah, it's kind of a blessing in disguise.
Exactly. Funnily, I was so miserable then, but it turned out that I was lucky.
Do you think that your knowledge of both Hebrew and English kind of benefited you?
Oh, definitely. Not just English. I'm not just Hebrew. I studied altogether about 11 languages.
Oh, really? Wow.
Not that I am proficient in all of them, but I know about the structure of these languages. And I think it benefited, and it also shaped my own approach to research later on, because I'm a firm believer in the interaction between the languages, not necessarily L1, but any language you know and any language you're learning.
Yeah. So there's no boundaries, they overlap, and Okay, so you're best known for vocabulary acquisition studies, and you talked in your. I was surprised to hear that you said it was once the stepchild, or it was once considered that.
Right.
Obviously, in part, that's not the case now.
No, not at all.
But why do you think that was at the time?
Well, in the days of generative grammar, everybody was excited about the system, and grammar was the system. Lexis was not systematic. Besides, it was a reaction against behaviorism, and people believed that lexis is learned by stimulus response, and that's it. So since behaviorism was out of favor, lexis was out of favor, and everybody was doing grammar, and nobody was doing pedagogical research of lexis.
Right.
But then it changed.
At what point? What kind of year are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certain that the year of legitimization of second language vocabulary research is 1990, with Paul Nation's book, his first book. Vocabulary in a second language. That's not his big book of 2001 that has been revised now, but his very first book in 1990 that came out in Newbury House in America. Right. And here was somebody who was talking about the importance of vocabulary, about possibilities of research of vocabulary. From that year onwards, you started seeing more and more papers on vocabulary. So I would put the vocabulary revival revolution in 1990.
Right, okay. And Paul Nation's working in New Zealand.
Yes.
And we're currently in Japan.
Yeah.
And in your talk you said that Japan's your second favourite country after New Zealand.
New Zealand, right, professionally as well.
That's professionally,
right.
And culturally.
Yeah. Well, I don't know any other country that has a journal of vocabulary teaching and instruction. Japan has. I don't know any other country that every single year has a vocabulary research interest group that organizes a conference on vocabulary. So actually Japan, I think, is most active in vocabulary research.
Why do you think that is?
Well, why is that? I think maybe for two reasons. First of all, I think Paul Nation has a lot to do with it, because for years he taught here and his influence is evident here. So I think that is one reason. The other reason may be because for years learning a foreign language was restricted to classroom only, and maybe the teachers here became more aware of the problems of language learning than, for example, their peers in Europe, where people had much more exposure outside the classroom.
Right.
Yes. And when you become aware of problems of language learning, you must get to vocabulary teaching.
I see. Do you think that, Japan has a history of their own kind of ways of learning English? For example, yakudoku, are you familiar with? It's kind of like a reverse translation where they used English as a way to translate rather than to communicate. And it goes back to when they were deciphering kind of Chinese. And they were it was kind of direct grammar translation. Do you think that an interest in vocabulary kind of comes out of that very kind of textual use of English?
Maybe, but some people use grammar translation as a kind of evil method. I mean, I don't ban any method. It all has to do with proper balance. And if you have proper balance on form-focused instruction and of input-based instruction, communicative grammar translation, then it is okay.
That's the magic formula, yeah. And I was surprised when I was in your talk on Saturday. You showed us a text with 80% of the vocabulary present.
Right, and 20 deleted.
And
nobody could understand it.
Right,
exactly.
It didn't make any sense at all.
Right.
So I was really surprised by that. And you said that most recent research shows that learners need 98% for 70%?
For a comprehension score on a comprehension test, about 70%. Yeah.
So I guess my question is, do you think that higher targets and thresholds should be kind of encouraged? Yeah,
because in order to get to that coverage of 98%, you need the knowledge of 6,000 to 8,000 word families.
Right.
Now, I heard that the target in Japanese high school, for example, is 3,000.
Okay.
Of course, when they finish high school, they're not supposed to be reading academic literature, so you don't need 6,000 to 8,000. But imagine these kids going into university and being faced with academic literature. Imagine the gap they have to bridge. I don't think they will bridge the gap from 3,000 to 6,000 in 1 or 2 years of college, so that they become proficient. Therefore, I think I would set the target for high school at 5,000.
Right.
Now, if you remember, I was showing the table of Japanese vocabulary size studies, and the kids actually have about 3,000 word families at the end of high school. So they so you have the target and they reached it. So
Right.
why not set the target higher?
Yeah. Do you think that there could be some problems with kind of test kind of washback, with trying to take on too many words for test purposes
Uh,
in the long term, I guess?
Again, it's all a matter of balance. They'll be tested on many things.
Sure. Yeah. So it's not just vocabulary.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
If we think about a particular high school learner, I often see like high school learners on the train studying word lists, vocabulary word
Yeah.
lists, and what advice would you kind of give to that learner, or would you say keep doing what you're doing?
Well, first of all, I would say keep doing what you're doing, but that's not the only thing you should be doing. By the way, I can tell you that I was doing exactly the same. When I was going to high school by bus, we didn't have cars then, our family didn't have cars. That's exactly what I was doing. I was repeating, because you have to rehearse vocabulary. Of course, that doesn't make you a good language learner, not necessarily, because there are all kinds of other things. But if this is reinforcement, and from time to time you have to repeat the words, because otherwise you will forget them. So there is nothing wrong in sitting there and learning the list. But of course, if they think that that's what language learning is, then that's wrong.
Yeah.
So we're back to our magic formula, proper balance.
Proper balance. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Well. So you talk about a magic balance, and you propose an alternative hypothesis which concerns like word-focused instruction.
That
this
was
what
a
you
kind
mean?
of, yes. I mean, this was my reaction to those people who say that vocabulary will take care of itself.
Yeah.
Now, there's plenty of people who say that vocabulary is actually the outcome of anything else you do, like communication, reading, etc. And I'm saying, well, of course you have to have input, of course you have to have communication, but vocabulary will not take care of itself. Don't fool yourself. So therefore you need to add the vocabulary focused component, which looks at vocabulary as the object of study rather than as a kind of a felicitous outcome.
Kind of incidental
Exactly.
learning, right? Yeah.
So that's why my word focused instruction position doesn't mean that input is not important, communication is not important. No, it simply means that you have to supplement, for example, extensive reading. That's Paul Nation's position, that extensive reading is very, very important. I don't dispute that, but I think that very often in a classroom learning situation where you do not have that much exposure, you have to compensate with word-focused instruction.
And by word-focused instruction, is that similar to a lexical approach?
Not necessarily. I
syllabus?
think, I think that lexical syllabus has gone overboard. Because they say, well, grammar is not grammar, all grammatical structure are basically lexical structure. I don't believe that. No.
Right.
No. But word-focused instruction simply means that you have to decontextualize words to draw attention to words.
Okay.
The whole business of decontextualization, again, people don't like it, but if you think of it, even when you read and you look up a word in a dictionary, what are you doing? You are decontextualizing a word.
Yeah,
You're picking it up from a text and you're drawing your attention and you're looking it up in a dictionary. So there is nothing wrong with decontextualization and drawing specific attention to the words. That's what word-focused instruction is.
I see, yeah. Going back to the original point about native and non-native speaker teachers, often one of the benefits of having for example, a Japanese teacher of English will be that they will be able to readily offer those words. However, like kind of CLT methods kind of favour kind of learner-to-learner negotiation.
Okay. Again, we're back to the magic balance. There is nothing wrong with good learners teaching poorer learners. Of course, my question is why shouldn't they benefit? Who will teach the good learners?
Right. Yeah,
So there is nothing wrong with negotiation of meaning, with communicating. But if you look at what is happening nowadays, when kids get involved in chat and computer interaction, there's nothing wrong in itself, but they talk with mistakes and they perpetuate wrong language. And it doesn't bother anybody because it's communicative. So you cannot rely on that. You have to have kind of big brother watching.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. One of the programs that I work on is a fluency-based program where we're kind of strongly encouraged not to offer the word if they need it, and kind of defer to the students to work out the meaning. And my Japanese colleagues at times get very angry with this approach because they know the word and they know how it could benefit the learners. And
I agree with them. I would also get angry.
yeah,
Yeah, I would.
yeah,
Because, actually, there is a very funny example, and I saw it with my own eyes. Very often, teachers do not want to translate a new word for students, and they sometimes try to negotiate the meaning, try to give examples, try to act it out, and then the student says, I understand it now, and he writes it down in his L1. So what is that? What does it show you? It shows you that the ultimate awareness of understanding is being able to refer to your own L1. Of course, when you have an equivalent.
Right, I see. Yeah, so for example, some of my colleagues, they kind of feel a bit hard done by where they're kind of seeing the results of learner-to-learner negotiation of meaning. They're seeing the wrong words being used and being fossilized,
exactly.
and they kind of feel kind of powerless to kind of really make any change and into the wider profession in general.
Why would they? I think they should speak up.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, yeah. It just kind of seems that direct L1 to L2 translation is not kind of the popular paradigm.
But it doesn't mean that you should always do it. But you know how much time it saves, and what's wrong with that? It saves a lot of time.
And it has the best outcomes, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Besides, it doesn't mean that that's everything you do. You do other things as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So, in terms of how you conduct research, you obviously use a number of different vocabulary tests. I wonder, for our listeners, could you kind of briefly describe what kind of tests are out there and accessible?
The tests, if you're referring to vocabulary size tests, so the most known test was Paul Nation's levels test, which didn't give you the exact size, but you could calculate the approximate size. They gave you the level at which student is. Now we have Begler and Nation vocabulary size test, the multiple choice test. These are tests of word recognition, and what I have done now is to produce CATS, a computer adaptive test of size and strength, where I test not just recognition but recall of the word itself, which is active, recall of the meaning, which is recall of meaning, and then recognition of form, recognition of meaning. So different levels of knowledge. So these are the tests of vocabulary size. Right. And of course they are very useful. They can be useful for placement, for example. If you want to see what kind of reading material to assign, you can test and see how many words your students know, and then choose the reading material appropriately. For example, all graded readers are graded in terms of vocabulary size they require.
Yeah.
So it is a very good predictor of reading.
And does that original vocabulary come out of corpora, learner corpora?
Yes, of course. How are the vocabulary size tests created? You cannot test 10,000 words, right? So you test samples from frequency bands, and these frequency bands are based on large corpora. For example, the VST is based on the British National Corpus, and the new CATS that I've produced with one of my PhD students, ex-PhD students, is based on BNC and COCA together.
I see.
So they have to be corpus-based.
Yeah, I see. And in your talk, there was one point that I wanted to ask you about. You said that some people don't differentiate between knowledge and usage.
Yeah.
And I think maybe your CATS test.
No. The CATS test different levels of knowledge.
Right.
Use is using the word at one's own choice. So some people say that knowledge and use is the same thing, but I don't think so, because you cannot use something you do not know, but you can know things and not use them, choose not to use them, because in order to use something, you need more than knowledge. You need confidence, you need, maybe it's a matter of personality. Some people would like to show off with kind of a sophisticated vocabulary, other people want to be simple, and you also need ease of access, because if your time is limited, very often the first word that comes to your mind is not the infrequent word which you know. So therefore I measure use and I measure knowledge, and they are different constructs, in my opinion.
What can you give any examples of how people would disagree with that?
Well,
not naming names or
yeah. Well, somebody now is trying to prove that the two are exactly the same construct, and he's saying that by looking at a piece of writing of a person, he can predict how many words a person knows.
Right.
Well, I don't think he has proved it, but he's trying to. I say, fine, if you do that, I mean, I always say fine, but it just doesn't look sensible, because you don't show everything you know.
Yeah. So you were talking in your presentation about stretching the boundaries of meaning. So, for example, you were talking about word families and talking about learners need about 3,000 knowledge of 2,000 to 3,000 word families, and having
in order to
have conversation or hold conversation.
Okay, in order to express simple ideas, you can manage with 2,000 word families, but of course the question is, what will happen when the interlocutor is going to use a more sophisticated language, because you have to understand what he's saying, so you can express yourself. But if you're talking about a dialogue, it's not certain at all.
So is this where maybe extended knowledge would come into play? That they'd need to call upon all these families, or stretching the boundaries of meaning of words in order to keep the conversation?
Well, not necessarily. You simply need more words for listening.
For listening.
For listening.
Okay, I see. And comprehensions.
Yeah, exactly. Because dialogue is not just producing your own stuff; it's just also comprehending what the other person is saying to you.
So in a previous interview, we spoke to Professor Anna Cianova, and she's a specialist in multi-word phrases or units. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, the multi-word units, yeah.
And I guess the two research fields are very similar.
Well, multi-word units are part of vocabulary.
Yeah.
Vocabulary is not just a collection of single words, but also multi-word units. So multi-word units could be taught exactly in the same way as single words are taught. So if I want to teach serendipity by translation, by putting it in sentences, by devising a task, I could also use a multi-word unit like as a matter of fact, or a collocation like follow instructions. Of course, the problem with the multi-word units is that very often teachers are not aware that there is a multi-word unit that is problematic. Maybe as a matter of fact is not a good example, but collocations are the best example of the difficulty even teachers have with knowing that there is a collocation, particularly if they are native speakers of the language. The non-native speakers would spot them.
Yeah.
When they are different from L1.
Yeah, I see. And you said that you can. It's very easy to spot a non-native speaker. For example, if you received a letter or an email.
Yeah.
I'm just like I find the word "spot" kind of like a spy. Kind of
well, collocations are so difficult that research shows that they are learned last.
Yeah.
So when you look at people, very advanced people, and use measures of, let's say, vocabulary richness, vocabulary variation, use of collocation, knowledge of collocation, you'll see that collocations are always a score less than other factors of other features of knowledge and use. In other words, if somebody writes a very nice composition, sophisticated, and very often you can see, that collocation, he didn't get that.
I see. Why do you think that is?
Well, because why are collocations so problematic? Well, for several reasons. Because first of all, I don't think there is any rule in combining them. Why do you follow instructions in English? In Hebrew, we obey instructions. Now, rain is heavy. My students told me during the weekend that in Japanese the rain is strong, right?
Yeah.
In Hebrew
right,
too.
Yeah.
But in English it's heavy. Why? Well, there are no rules. You see? So that is why, and there is a huge number of these, and teachers are not aware of them.
Yeah.
Especially if they're native speakers. I mean, they can't see what's the problem with heavy rain, or with follow instructions, or even with make a decision. You know, in Hebrew we say receive a decision.
And it's the same. Yeah. You said make a decision, and receive was. Or it was another. You were talking about.
Make an effort.
Yeah.
Make an effort is no problem.
Yeah. Right.
For Hebrew speakers, make a decision is a problem.
Right.
Now, it looks like kind of totally illogical, right? But no, it is very logical.
Right.
So collocations are, first of all, there are no rules of combinations, and second, so many of them are different from L1. So I think that these are the two major reasons why collocations are so difficult. And also, they are transparent semantically. For example, if you see them in the input, follow instructions, make a decision, heavy rain, you understand them, right? Now, if you understand them, then you don't pay attention to them.
Right.
And when you have to produce language, that's where problems begin.
I see. Okay. So there are a lot of prevailing vocabulary myths that exist in our field. What do you feel needs to be addressed?
Well, the first thing, if people still believe, if there are some people who believe that vocabulary will take care of itself if you do enough reading, if you do enough communication, then I think they are either naive or too optimistic. Vocabulary will not take care of itself unless you draw people's attention to particular words. You don't have to draw the attention to every single word, but some of the words have to be attended to. So that's one myth. The other one has to do with the use of L1. Because, again, to ban L1 from language classroom is inefficient. And in vocabulary in particular, there's so many words that can be so easily understood just by referring to your first language. And sometimes, even if you cannot translate the word, you have to explain it, why you cannot translate it.
Right.
Now, for example, we talked about collocations. I have some piece of research that shows that when you translate collocations and when you show learners that these particular collocations are not the same in L1, they will notice that and they will know it much better. So that's another myth, kind of do away with L1. One of my favorite teachers once said, people who want to get rid of the first language will have to get rid of the learner. You cannot get rid of the first language. It's there in the mind of the learner, so why not harness it to our own benefits? So that's another myth. And what else? What other myths there are? That if you ask students, for example, to write sentences, then they will use vocabulary in the way you want them to use. No, they won't, because very often sentence writing is an avoidance activity. For example, if you ask them to write a sentence with traffic, they will not produce heavy traffic. They will say, I hate traffic in the morning. So what have you achieved?
Yeah.
Well, you've seen that if somebody can construct a sentence, but in terms of lexical knowledge, you haven't achieved. So, in other words, you have to elicit exactly what you want to elicit, because students on their own will not give it to you. And another myth is that, well, if you do all kinds of matching exercises and a sentence writing and somehow make students communicate, then the vocabulary will pop up. I don't think so. I think that you really have to work very hard to elicit the vocabulary for productive purposes.
So you think you think more inputs leads to greater output?
No, not necessarily. That is word-focused instruction.
Right, I see. Yeah.
Not any input.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I understand. Okay, so you talked about vocabulary could be better instructed if it is thought about in terms of differential learnability. And if you could expand on this.
Well, differential learnability, not all words were created equal for the learners. Some words are very easy and some words are difficult. For example, we were talking about myth. I was talking a little bit about teaching myth, but I'm beginning to think there are all kinds of research myth as well. For example, one of the myth, I think, is that learning a word is an incremental activity. So they say you know the word vaguely first, and then you get into the precise knowledge of meaning and other features of knowledge. Now, why is that? Not true. How incremental is your learning of the word cat? What is there to deepen?
Yeah.
So some words are very easy, and if a word is a loan word, then it doesn't have to be known passively first and only later actively. Not at all. You can immediately start using it once you realize that the word means exactly the same in your L1 and it sounds very similar to what your L1 does.
Yeah.
So these are easy words. On the other hand, there are very difficult words that have to be taught in more detail and have to be practiced, and that's what I mean by differential learnability.
Okay.
Differential learnability should lead to differential teaching. And of course, one of the examples is collocations that are different in L1 or words that are lexicalized differently in your native language.
And you mentioned false friends, and often learners may use their own kind of tactics or think they're doing the right thing.
Well, false friends are words that have a similar form, but they do not mean the same. Of course, I don't know Japanese. Yes, mansion.
Right, yeah, and that means something completely
different. Okay, so that's a false friend. But again, here you have to draw people's attention. Otherwise, they will tend to think that, well, if lemon is the same as lemon in Japanese, right? So why couldn't mansion be the same as in English? So this is one example of particular difficulty.
I see. Okay, that's one example. Okay, and perhaps just one more question. Just for, I don't want to keep you too much longer. What advice would you give to anyone who would like to go into vocabulary research? Are there any areas that are over-researched or under-researched? Or?
Well, any type of research that is good is fine. What advice would I give, like PhD students? Well, my advice to my students is always try to be original.
Yeah.
Try to be original, because, well, it's nice to replicate somebody else's studies, and it's important. It's nice to expand on somebody else's ideas, and it's very important. But if you can be original, that's where the contribution lies.
Yeah.
And my other advice is, particularly to people who are teachers, use your common sense, use your gut feeling. Don't get enmeshed in nice theories, because many of these theories might not apply to your particular students, your particular environment. Use your experience and build on that. I mean, I've been doing that for years.
And it's working.
Somehow it's working.
And could you perhaps give any kind of references for our listeners if they want to kind of grab a book from the shelf?
The best one is Collocations, Learning Vocabulary in Another Language. The first edition was in 2001, and he has just revised it 2013. That's the best one. For researchers, there are two good research books. One by Webb and Nation. I don't remember, it's Nation and Webb, or Webb and Nation, Researching Vocabulary. Another one by Schmidt, Researching Vocabulary. They came out in 2011 and 2012. Very close, close, and they both are good research manuals for vocabulary. That's for already researchers, but for somebody who is kind of wants to get into vocabulary, I would suggest Collocations.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, we'll leave it there, but thank you very much. It's been very interesting.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
It's always nice to be in Japan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening today. We'd also like to say a huge thank you to Dr. Batia Laufer for her time. So we'll be back again with a regular episode soon. However, in the meantime, feel free to check us out on Twitter @TEFLology. send us an email at teflology@gmail.com or like our Facebook page. We also now have a WordPress website, teflology-podcast.com, and that's our new home with all of our episodes uploaded. Okay, so thanks again, and we'll be back soon.